Good morning. Time for the Henry George Daily Devotional. We're not messing around today. We continue in chapter 3. Wages not drawn from capital but produced by the labor is the title of this chapter. We continue. Alright, we're going to go through the complex forms of production and George is going to show us that something is still true of the complex forms that's also true of the simple forms, which is probably that wages come from labor, not from capital. Let's find out. Next, just verifying I'm recording. Next, in simplicity to that original state of things, of which many examples may yet be found, where the whole produce of labor belongs to the laborer, is the arrangement in which the laborer, through working for another person or with the capital of another person, receives his wages in kind, that is to say, in the things his labor produces. In this case, it is as clear as in the case of the self-employing laborer that the wages are really drawn from the product of the labor, not at all from capital. If I hire a man to gather eggs, or pick berries, or to make shoes, paying him from the eggs, the berries, or the shoes that his labor secures, there can be no question that the source of the wages is the labor for which they are paid. Of this form of hiring is the sayer and dare stock tenancy. I do not know this sayer and dare term. I do not remember. It's ancient Irish law. Sayer means free and dare is unfree. Okay. Of this form of hiring is the sayer and dare stock tenancy, treated of with such perspicuity. Perspicuity, I do know what that means. It means with great understanding or foresight. By Sir Henry Maine in his Early History of Institutions, and which so clearly involved the relation of employer and employed as to render the acceptor of cattle the man or vassal of the capitalist who thus employed him. It was on such terms as these that Jacob worked for Laban. That is a reference to the Bible. And to this day, even in civilized countries, it is not an infrequent mode of employing labor. The farming of land on shares, which prevails to a considerable extent in the southern states of the Union and in California, the state in which I live. The métayer system of Europe, as well, I think I googled this before, I don't remember, as well as the many cases in which superintendents, salesmen, etc. are paid by a percentage of profits. What are they but the employment of labor for wages, which consists of part of its produce? No argument for me there, George. The next step in the advance from simplicity to complexity is where the wages, though estimated in kind, are paid in an equivalent of something else. For instance, on American whaling ships, the custom is not to pay fixed wages, but a lay, or proportion of the catch, which varies from a 16th to a 12th to the captain, down to a 300th to the cabin boy. Thus, when a whale ship comes into New Bedford or San Francisco after a successful cruise, she carries in her hold the wages of her crew, as well as the profits of her owners, and an equivalent which will reimburse them for all the stores used up during the voyage. Can anything be clearer than that these wages, this oil and bone which the crew of the whaler have taken, have not been drawn from capital, but are really a part of the produce of their labor? Nor is this fact changed or obscured in the slightest degree, where, as a matter of convenience, instead of dividing up between the crew their proportion of the oil and bone, the value of each man's share is estimated at the market price, and he is paid for it in money. The money is but the equivalent of the real wages, the oil and bone. In no way is there any advance of capital in this payment. The obligation to pay wages does not accrue until the value from which they are to be paid is brought into port. At the moment when the owner takes from his capital money to pay the crew, he adds to his capital oil and bone. So far there can be no dispute. Let us now take another step, which will bring us to the usual method of employing labor and paying wages. The Farallone Islands off the Bay of San Francisco are a hatching ground of seafowl, and a company who claim these islands employ men in the proper season to collect the eggs. They might employ these men for a proportion of the eggs they gather, as is done in the whale fishery, and probably would do so if there were much uncertainty attending the business. But as the fowl are plentiful and tame, and about so many eggs can be gathered by so much labor, they find it more convenient to pay their men fixed wages. The men go out and remain on the islands, gathering the eggs and bringing them to a landing, whence at intervals of a few days they are taken in a small vessel to San Francisco and sold. When the season is over, the men return and are paid their stipulated wages in coin. Does not this transaction amount to the same thing as if, instead of being paid in coin, the stipulated wages were paid in an equivalent of the eggs gathered? Does not the coin represent the eggs, by the sale of which it was obtained? And are not these wages as much the product of the labor for which they are paid as the eggs would be in the possession of a man who gathered them for himself, without the intervention of any employer? To take another example which shows by reversion the identity of wages in money with wages in kind. In San Buenaventura lives a man who makes an excellent living by shooting for their oil and skins the common hair seals which frequent the islands forming the Santa Barbara Channel. When on these sealing expeditions he takes 2 or 3 Chinamen along to help him, whom at first he paid wholly in coin. But it seems that the Chinese highly value some of the organs of the seal, which they dry and pulverize for medicine, as well as the long hairs in the whiskers of the male seal, which, when over a certain length, they greatly esteem for some purpose that to outside barbarians is not very clear. And this man soon found that the Chinamen were very willing to take instead of money these parts of the seals killed, so that now in large part he thus pays them their wages. Now is not what may be seen in all these cases, the identity of wages in money with wages in kind, true of all cases in which wages are paid for productive labor? Is not the fund created by the labor really the fund from which the wages are paid? It may perhaps be said there is this difference where a man works for himself, or where, when working for an employer, he takes his wages in kind. His wages depend upon the result of his labor. Should that, from any misadventure, prove futile, he gets nothing. When he works for an employer, however, he gets his wages anyhow. They depend upon the performance of the labor, not upon the result of the labor. But this is evidently not a real distinction, for on the average the labor that is rendered for fixed wages not only yields the amount of the wages, but more. Else employers could make no profit. When wages are fixed, the employer takes the whole risk and is compensated for this assurance. For wages when fixed are always, I think that arc should be just R-A-R-E. For wages when fixed are always somewhat less than wages contingent. But though when fixed wages are stipulated, the laborer who has performed his part of the contract has usually a legal claim upon the employer, it is frequently, if not generally, the case that the disaster which prevents the employer from reaping benefit from the labor prevents him from paying the wages. And in one important department of industry, the employer is legally exempt in case of disaster, although the contract be for wages certain and not contingent. For the maxim of admiralty law is that freight is the mother of wages, and though the seaman may have performed his part, the disaster which prevents the ship from earning freight deprives him of claim for his wages. In this legal maxim is embodied the truth for which I am contending. Production is always the mother of wages. Without production, wages would not and could not be. It is from the produce of labor, not from the advances of capital, that wages come. Wherever we analyze the facts, this will be found to be true. For labor always precedes wages. This is as universally true of wages received by the laborer from an employer as it is of wages taken directly by the laborer who is his own employer. In the one class of cases as in the other, reward is conditioned upon exertion, paid sometimes by the day, oftener by the week or month, occasionally by the year, and in many branches of production by the piece. The payment of wages by an employer to an employee always implies the previous rendering of labor by the employee for the benefit of the employer. For the few cases in which advance payments are made for personal services are evidently referable either to charity or to guarantee and purchase. All right, I want to make a little bit of a note of this bit, but I'll finish this paragraph. The name retainer given to advance payments to lawyers shows the true character of the transaction, as does the name "blood money" given in longshore vernacular to a payment which is nominally wages advanced to sailors, but which in reality is purchase money, both English and American law considering a sailor as much as a chattel as a pig. Yes, this retainer, this advancement out of like charity or guarantee. Because let's see, yesterday I just watched a video about video game developers trying to get publisher money, and it's tempting in this case to think of the limit being the capital available to employ the workers. Uh, and it is weird when you need to when a project is going to take several years and the laborer, in this case the game developer, will not have perhaps the funds to provide for their own food and shelter for that time. Uh, Often, you can offer them equity, but if that's not going to cover their food and shelter and their ability to labor for all that time, you need to basically extend some kind of advancement on their wages. I mean, you could think of it's definitely true that a partially produced video game is worth something, and you by the laborer making that, and then the publisher or whomever, the investors receiving that, that is definitely valuable to them. Just as when Henry George was talking about, um, when a laborer is using a piece of leather and fashioning like a shoe or something, at every moment, I think he's already talked about that. Maybe he's about to talk about this sort of thing. At every moment, that piece of leather is becoming more and more valuable. At no point is it less valuable. Just like at every moment when a house is being built, more and more wealth is being created, because a partially built house is definitely of value to many people, because I guess because it can become a fully built house. And there are some little nagging thoughts popping up in my brain about how a partially built house isn't very widely, like, a lot of people wouldn't be able to make use of that, because a lot of people don't know how to build a house, but they would be able to trade it to find the person who can build the house. And there's also all these like little nagging ideas of like, well, when I think of somebody who wants to sell a half-built house, I usually be like, uh-oh, something's wrong. And that is usually the case, that like something went bad in that deal. And George does talk about wasteful labor, that in those cases this doesn't really hold. Um, but yeah, I don't know. These are some of my thoughts, but it's time to go. See you tomorrow.